Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today in the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium for our History is Lunch program. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. If you have not already, please silence your cell phones. I want to tell you about a couple of events that we have coming up on Friday, April the 6th at 6:30 p.m. Belhaven University theater students will perform adaptations of 19th century ghost stories at the Manship House Museum. It should be a fun event. To reserve your spot for this free program, you can call or email the Manship House. And then next Wednesday, April the 4th, will be the 50th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King Jr. In commemoration of that, FedEx Corporation is providing free admission for the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum all that day, and the museums will be open extended hours until 7 o'clock. I hope that you'll be able to join us for that. There will be, I think, in this space at 6 p.m. on that day, next Wednesday, a week from today, a special program, brief, but honoring the life of Dr. King that will be of interest to everybody. And then for History is Lunch that day, we'll have Charles McLaurin, James Meredith, and Flunzy Brown Wright with us to present Mississippi and MLK. It should be a really great program. And Mr. Meredith and Mrs. Brown Wright will have copies of their books for sale. Today, we are delighted to have Tom Watts with us to talk about the history of Terry, which celebrated its sesquicentennial anniversary last year. In 2016, a committee formed to plan for that occasion tapped Tom to oversee the creation of the commemorative book, A Mississippi Town Called Terry, 1867 to 2017. It was so excellent and fabulously successful that it sold out of its initial print run. Tom's going to tell you about how you can get a copy as they are being reordered now. Tom Watts is a native of Jackson and a graduate of the University of Southern Mississippi, the University of Southern California, and the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Watts retired with the rank of colonel after 28 years on active duty in the United States Army and returned to Mississippi to teach American history in the Madison County School District for another 14 years. Watts is a volunteer at the Mississippi Governor's Mansion and here at the two Mississippi museums. Help me welcome our longtime friend, Tom Watts.
Little Marco Rubio type, whatever. Terry, which by dim morning light to my drowsy eyes did not look very prepossessing. To the right, a long line of stores extending down in front of the depot, there stopping very suddenly. And to the left, a hill, on the top of which nestled down into a miniature forest which surrounded it with a regular old-time plantation house, with a home-like look about it, looking not unlike some picture of a country scene one oft-times sees. On inquiring, the station master informed me that it belonged to and was one residence of a Mr. Old John Burnett, whom I have since met, and found to be one of the most whole-souled, hospitable gentlemen living. And to him and his fair lady and winsome and accomplished daughters, I am indebted for many courtesies and kindnesses they have shown to me. I was satisfied with my first look at Terry, and when I interviewed the station master as to the possibilities of getting a place to put up for the night, he drowsily informed me that there was no place that he knew. The situation was desperate, and I was getting so too. When the station master, whose name, by the way, is Herndon, and who I found to be a gentleman in every sense of the word, taking in the situation and pity on me invited me to pile up with him, which I did, and slept the sleep of innocence until the daylight. Terry by daylight looked somewhat better. It is quite a thriving little town. In the fruit season, it is the depot for all the fruit around the country for miles. I stayed on reliable information that during the season just passed, there was more than 40,000 boxes of peaches alone, as well as an immense quantity of other fruit shipped to your city and elsewhere. This is a description of Terry, Mississippi in 1872 by a reporter from the Times-Democrat of New Orleans, traveling by train stopover at night in Terry. As in any project, like writing or editing a book, there are so many important people that are a part of this team that produce the final product. And I must recognize those, especially first, a big thanks to the Terry family themselves, descendants of William David Terry, the founder of Terry, who provided exceptional support during this project, were Anne Elizabeth Hurt, Carolyn Hurt, Terry Cummings Gaines, and George Terry. Unfortunately, none of them live in Terry now. Then there's those foot soldiers we had. I couldn't ask for a better group of people to work with, and I want to help me with putting the book together, editing and putting it together. They brought the stories, the pictures, and articles and helped publish the book. They are Virginia Bailey, Carolyn Clements, Joanne Combs Lawrence, Addie Wright, and Renee Wright. And I'm going to have to say a little bit more about Renee Wright. Addie will tell you she kept my nose to the grindstone to get this done. She was very good. Also, I'd like to thank Albert Smathers, professor of art at Mississippi College, for this beautiful cover of the book. If you're ever in Terry, you will find some of his work on the side of the former drugstore, the head drugstore in Terry, murals on the side showing scenes of Terry in the past. Also, I better say something else here about our officials from Terry. I would like to thank the officials for their help, especially Mayor Joseph O. Kendrick Jr., who happens to be here today. Quick question. You can just raise your hand. How many people are from Terry or lived in Terry at one time or another? Raise your hand. Uh-oh. I better not say anything that is... This is my jury, and I've got some on the front row here that will ensure that I better watch what I'm saying here. No. Great, great town. And how did I get involved in this? I am not from Terry. I am from Jackson, born and raised. And they said I was gone for 28 years in the Army. And I come back and I'm living up in Madison. I'm a docent at the governor's mansion, and one of the docents there, Carolyn Clements, asked me, this was about the May or June time frame, telling me that it was the 150th anniversary of Terry, Mississippi this year, 2017. And if I could help just a little bit, to give some ideas on how to put a book together or something like that, would I mind meeting with the book committee in Terry? I decided I would do that. I'd try to help as much as I could on it. Obviously, they were looking for somebody who was crazy enough to put this thing together because they wanted to have it done and printed by the 1st of December. And when I met with them, it was the 9th of July. So I said, okay, what do y'all have story-wise and pictures and things like that? And then wonderfully, they showed up with about 4 or 5 boxes of stories, pictures, and things like that to get me going. So my wonderful wife, I have to thank her too, for the next, 3 months, rest of July, August, September, we had to have it completed to the printer by the middle of October. So has anybody ever written a book in less than 3 months or edited a book in less than 3 months? I think I have that award for the quickest one done. I'm not sure. But it came out beautifully. It was done that way because of the people that are right here with us today that helped me put this together. I could not have done this without it. Somebody told me, they looked at my book and they said, "You must have gone back when the world began." I said, no, I didn't. I came close. But I wanted to show what the area of Terry would have looked like back thousands and thousands of years ago. But I won't go back to the beginning of time. I'll start around the woodland period, the mound builders period, because the Mississippi period of the late woodland period of North America, pre-Columbian culture, lasted from about 1150 to about 1600 A.D. The most striking thing about this period are the mound builders of this period. And there's actually a mound, the Berry Mound, that is in the vicinity of Terry, Mississippi. There's also a village site there alongside of it. A small portion of the mound, unfortunately, was removed by earth-moving machines. There's grass, bushes, small trees cover the surface of the mound. But there is archaeological evidence there was a village next to the mound. Their Mississippi Archaeological Survey team in 1969 did a survey to find this out for us. So we have people right there more than 1,000 years ago that are living in the area of Terry. I guess we could call them Terry citizens. Might go back and try to get some taxes from them or something. It was not until the early 1800s, around 1811, that some of the first white settlers came into the area. So you know this land was the Choctaw land. It was their land. The first family, or best known family, that came into the southern portion of Hinds County was a Mary Stovall in 1811. She was a widow of Josiah Stovall, a Revolutionary soldier who had come to this area, and she was a mother of 17 children. God bless her. 4 of her sons served during the War of 1812. At the time of her death, she had descendants numbered over 600. That was about the size of Terry in 1960. Okay? So, the interesting thing about it, one of her daughters married a man by the name of Lewis B. Holloway. That name might be familiar for the fact he was one of the organizers of the First Baptist Church of Jackson, Mississippi. Also the Baptist Church of Clinton. He is buried, he also fought in the War of 1812, and he is buried in the Terry Cemetery. Now, after the great victory at the Battle of New Orleans, you have all of these militiamen from Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky heading back north. Most of them went up along the Mississippi River to Natchez and then followed the Natchez Trace. Not General Carroll. He wanted to go home quick, the straightest possible way. General Carroll, after the great victory in January the 8th, 1815, a couple of months later, starting in March, had his 2nd Division of Tennessee Militia cross Lake Pontchartrain, bypass Natchez, heading straight north, and they reached the Natchez Trace just north of the present-day Jackson at Brazier Stands. And that's when Brazier Stands was there, if you know where that's at. Many of you might have been there before. Shuckers, over the reservoir. That is where Brazier stands, one of the stands along the trace. Now, in going in that direction, they had to travel basically on the west side of the Pearl River. As they say, they crossed the Lake Pontchartrain. They came along the side of the Pearl River, as you see here, on the west side of it, up, and then here's about this point right here. I've got a better picture of it with the next map. Here we go. You can see Jackson. You can see where the line here is the old Nashville Natchez Road, or the Natchez Trace. And about at this point here is the Brazier Stand, is where they met up with. But they stayed on the west side of the Pearl River. As they traveled up that way, they actually passed within miles of what would be present-day Terry. The families of the Stovalls, along with Choctaw families in the area, helped provide food and drink as they traveled north. They virtually cut their way 125 miles through Mississippi, basically along what is today Highway 51, 55, and paralleling it. Here's the Pearl River. It's it's a major tributary there, just east of Terry, and it would be on the west side of the river that Carroll would take his people, his unit back up to Nashville. Now, I want to tell you how excited I was to find these two pictures. When we first started, I started researching this. I really didn't have that much time, so I went directly to a lot of things that I could try to find that would help me find out who William David Terry was. I knew he was buried there in the cemetery. There's a Terry family plot there. His father's buried there. He has a sister buried there. His children, there's some children buried there in the Terry family. So I said, well, who is this William David Terry? Well, I finally found where the William Terry family actually was. Unfortunately, there's a Robert Terry that was up at Leland, Mississippi. He has passed away. He kept the Terry book, the book on the Terrys, every Terry you could think of. Even if they weren't from William David Terry, wherever. I finally found two of William David Terry's daughters moved out to Fort Worth, Texas. And their descendants were out there, and they were big into ancestry. So I was able to go on Ancestry.com, and bingo, there's a picture of William David Terry and Sarah Terry, and was able to contact Carolyn Hurt, who was maintaining the William David Terry side of the family, ancestry information. Her mother had a locket with her grandparents' pictures in it, William David Terry and Sarah Terry. So this is how we got the pictures of the family there. William David Terry was born to Major Joseph Mentor Terry and Leda I. Mims in Edgefield County, South Carolina, on November the 7th, 1822. William David's mother died when he was about 2 years old, and Joseph, his father, married again. His second wife died. He married his second wife's sister, and in 1936, Joseph had moved to Georgia and then purchased land, several thousand acres, in what would be, what it was, the southern portion of Hinds County, near a community called Newtown. Now, Newtown is just north of what is where Terry's at. There's a community there, has church, and I'm trying to remember the name, just north of Glendale. Thank you very much. Just north of, that was about the location of where Newtown was at in that area. This is where basically the Stovalls lived and where the Terrys bought several thousand acres. Young William David would work with his father on the plantation, and his father's store called, the name of the store was Line Store. It was also a stagecoach stop. His father ran a stagecoach that would run down to Crystal Springs to Hazelhurst and then back up to Jackson. So this is where William would work and grow up. On August 2nd, 1842, William married Sarah A. Burnett. Interesting name. We will mention the Burnett, the old Mr. Burnett that owned property there in Terry. She was from Copiah County. William and Sarah would have a total of 8 children. There was Joseph, Jane, Carolyn, William, who would be known as Willie, John, Robert, George, Betty, and Belle. And Betty and Belle would be the 2 that would move to wind up in Fort Worth, Texas. Mr. Terry was assisted in securing the location of the town of Terry, of this property, with the help of Mr. Conway, who was an engineer on the railroad from New Orleans. Mr. Conway was also deeply in love with one of Mr. Terry's daughters. So that always kind of helps. A little romance in there, gets that in there. It was the New Orleans-Jackson Great Northern Railroad, now the Illinois Central, entered this section, and the matter of the location of where the rail station would be was under consideration and deliberation. Had the original plans gone forward, the depot and the business portion of Terry would have been perhaps more than a quarter of a mile north of where it is today. The land was the property of the community of Livingstons, with who the railroad authorities had been negotiating a trade of property. Mr. Terry desired that the town be located further south, and craving the distinction of having the said town be named for him, made a trade with a Mr. Robert Cunningham, who owned the desired town site, trading him a portion of his own property. Mr. Terry then offered to donate the right-of-way as well as the land for the depot, provided the town was named after him. And here's the depot and the trains of that time period, of the 1850s and 60s, as you see. Mr. Terry also donated sites for the churches, a school, and a cemetery. Mr. Terry said the property, sold property to prospective homeowners as well as businesses. The town of Terry was established around the year 1856. This is about 1855, 1856 time frame, and it was incorporated in 1869. Now, to be able to ensure that if you wanted to make it to the train on time, guess what you rode on? You rode on a William David Terry coach, four-horse coach. Here's an advertisement about the W.D. Terry's high-pressure four-horse coach. High pressure. I wonder what that meant. It must have shot him out of a cannon or something. I don't know. Mr. Terry ensured that his passengers using the Terry train station made their scheduled train. He owned the stagecoach line that brought the passengers from town as far away as Raymond, Mississippi. It was a good distance at that time to Terry's depot. Now, another thing that Mr. Terry did, he also raised mules and horses. And after the stagecoach line kind of went away with the trains and other ways of transportation, he actually sold mules and horses. And his nephew, William T. Terry, would take over that job after William David Terry passed away. His nephew, Will Terry, would then take over and have what it was called the mule barn. And I know you're not old enough to know this, but he moved the mule barn to Pascagoula Street in Jackson. Does anybody ever remember that one? Did you ever buy a mule? Pascagoula Street. Just checking. I won't ask Albert. But I thought that was pretty interesting. A lot of people say that Cotton was king. Well, Cotton was probably king in all the South, and to include Terry. But there were a couple other kings in Terry. We have your peaches and your railroad. Those were the basic three things that I call kings of Terry. The fruit, the vegetables, the depot they had there, the packing sheds they had there, the industry, but also the train. Terry was like many hundreds and hundreds of towns in Mississippi. Towns died because the train railroad tracks did not come by them, or if they didn't die, they had to move to the train tracks. And many towns actually, just like Terry, were born along the train tracks there. So it's very, very similar to many towns that you know of. As we were looking, I want to show you this picture, and I said the railroad is pretty well king in this area too. If you look at this guy here very closely, in the picture before of William David Terry, kind of look alike. I'm not sure if that's William David Terry. I doubt it, but I thought that is railroad workers near Terry, Mississippi, working on it, on the railroad. Unfortunately, on July the 13th, 1882, William David Terry died at the age of 59 and was buried in the Terry Cemetery along with other Terry family members. Sarah, the wife, moved to Fort Worth, Texas to live with her daughters, Belle and Betty. Now, I want to point out real quick, it tells about his death, how to respect his sister, and then talks about chicken cholera. I didn't know what chicken cholera was. I had never heard of that. But I guess they decided that that was probably one of the things he died of, was chicken cholera. Is there any doctors or nurses in here that can tell us what that was? Okay. Here's a beautiful picture. If you've never been to Terry, would go there. This is a Terry depot there in Terry, Mississippi. Has an interesting history on it. This train station actually in 1950 was moved from Terry to Parham Bridges Park in Jackson. Friends of Terry, with the help of the Hinds County Board of Supervisors, returned the historic building to Terry in the 1990s and have kept it up. The train you see over here, some of you might remember the train engine at Vaughn, Mississippi, famous for the Casey Jones disaster there, where Casey Jones, the famous railroad engineer, was killed. This was actually at that location and was also brought down to put by the museum with the help of the Friends of Terry. There's a lot of great stories about Terry. I'll tell you a couple. One of them was when the horse and wagon got stuck in the middle of the street of Terry, main street of Terry. You can imagine most towns at that town, dirt roads. You have the rains like we've had lately. You have a lot of mud, and all of a sudden a poor horse and wagon gets stuck in the middle of the road. Well, the good citizens of Terry got together, like they always do, and worked together to help pry out the horse and wagon by using rail lines, the rails themselves from the train track, to help pry this poor horse out, and it survived, thank goodness. Another one, and this is one of my favorite ones, the first mayor of Terry was Jimmy Childs. He was some type of a character. The history of Terry is interspersed with a little bit of humor as well as romance, as I've talked about earlier. For example, it was on one occasion Major Childs became slightly inebriated. And walking down the street, he falls into a ditch. Upon restoring his dignity and raising out of the ditch, he stated, "I find myself $2.50 in cost, which will be put on the court docket." So he fined himself and took care of the whole thing right there for the public to see. So good mayor. I know the mayor of Terry now would never do anything like that. One of the famous individuals, and there were quite a few famous individuals in Terry, was everybody probably knows, the Governor Albert Brown, G. Brown, Gallatin Brown. He was born in Chester District, South Carolina, came to Mississippi about the age of 10 in 1823 with his father, Joseph Brown, settling in Copiah County. He was admitted into the bar at the age of 20, quite young. When he was 21, he was elected representative from Copiah County for the state. He was a judge of the circuit court, serving until 1844 when he resigned to accept the governorship of the state. His 2 terms in his administration was well remembered as one of the most fortunate of administrations the state's ever had. Governor Brown would then go on and have a law office in Terry, and one in Crystal Springs, and one in Jackson. His main area, though, was Terry. He lived right outside of Terry on his plantation. And he died there in 1880, which he had acquired in 1860, the plantation there outside of Terry. It is still known as the Brown Place. Another famous Terrianite is Tommy Johnson, the blues man. In the 1920s, Tommy Johnson, an influential blues musician, claimed that he he had sold his soul to the devil at an exclusive Mississippi crossroad in exchange for fame and fortune. Has anyone heard this story before in Clarksdale, Mississippi? Well, I can tell you, this happened before that. So I think Tommy Johnson should be the one that got the actual selling his soul to the devil first story there. He recorded only 2 sessions in his entire life. One was for Victor Records in August of 1928, and then one for Paramount Records in December of 1929. This established him as a premier Delta blues vocalist of his day. Johnson died of a heart attack after playing at a party in 1956, and he is buried at Warm Springs Methodist Church Cemetery outside of Crystal Springs, Mississippi. Xena Johnson, very active in her community and served on many boards. This is a lady I don't think I would want to mess with, because she was a senior Olympian competing for 3 national senior Olympics, winning 7 medals, 3 of those gold medals. And it was if I didn't mention this was in swimming. At the age of 85, she was elected alderman for the town of Terry and served diligently until the age of 98. I can't count that high. Ms. Johnson served as a delegate at the Democratic National Convention in 2012 and was recognized as the oldest delegate in attendance, and she presented the Mississippi delegate count on national television. Ms. Johnson was Grand Marshal in Terry's 2015 Christmas Parade. The town of Terry twice honored her by designating Xena Johnson Day for her community spirit and achievements. Dr. Robert Smith. Dr. Smith is nationally known family physician, teacher, social activist, and one of the founders of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. He is a president and chief executive officer of the Central Mississippi Health Services. He is assistant clinical professor at the University of Mississippi Medical Center, the School of Medicine, and the American Medical Association presented Dr. Smith the Medal of Valor Award. Very honorable doctor. Now, this gets close to home. We have our mayor here. His mother, Yolanda Porter Kendrick, joined the Head Start program in 1969. Under her leadership, the Terry Head Start Center was one of the first centers to receive accreditation by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. She served as the center's administrator at Terry Head Start Center from August 1990 until she retired in August 2000. And unfortunately, she passed away that year. The Terry Head Start Center is named for Mrs. Kendrick. There were 2 drugstores in Terry. If you've grown up in a small town, I grew up in Jackson, but I spent a lot of time at my daddy's home in Georgetown, Mississippi. You might know where that's at, outside of Crystal Springs and Acehurst. In my grandmother's town of Medina. And the drugstore was one of the main places everybody gathered. You went there to get your medicine. Usually you had the soda fountain there, and a lot of times the drugstore had everything in the world you needed, and that's where you went. And when the doctor was not available, the druggist was always there to help you out and bandaged you up. Now, were there two? Here's Mr. Combs, and we have a lady here, Ms. Lawrence, that knows this young man quite well, is here with us from Terry. I'm glad she could make it. Mr. Combs' drugstore was your destination if you wanted to vote, pay utility bills, or make a long-distance phone call, since telephones were scarce. Sometimes doctors were not available in town, and Mr. Combs was called upon to clean and bandage scrapes and wounds. That's your typical druggist there. Then you had Mr. Head, served as the headquarters of the Greyhound bus stop. It was this bus station was his drugstore. The Greyhound bus went through Terry, always stopped there to pick up passengers, headed north to Jackson or south to Crystal Springs. A memory of that time was when young teens would, during the summertime, spend hours sitting on the floor by the magazine rack, reading the magazines, not having to pay for them. It seems that Mr. Head just never cared if they did or not, never minded at all. Now, like most small communities, one of the things that your community is built around is the church. It's the school, the church, and community type things. The church is one of the center points in it. As I mentioned, William David Terry donated the property for 4 churches: the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, which is the first one built, and where he went to, and the Catholic Church. The Catholics never built a church. They had a mission, and they had a church that was in Hazelhurst and Jackson, and they served smaller communities like Crystal Springs and Terry, but they never used that property at all. The Episcopal Church was the first church built in Terry, was built in the 1850s simultaneously with the founding of the town. It served as a hospital during the Civil War. The church today remains much as it was back in the 1850s. There is a grave behind the church, and on the left-hand side there are some beautiful windows. You've got to go see these. There's several windows in the church. They're absolutely gorgeous there. There was a cemetery for a little 6-year-old girl by the name of Clara Ayers. Young Clara was traveling with her family from Columbus, Georgia, and died as a result of yellow fever epidemic there in Terry that tragically struck the town in the summer of 1865. The members of the present congregation lovingly take care of this grave. Now here's 2 pictures, a drawing on the right-hand side of the Methodist Church, a picture of the First Baptist Church that was built there. As you see, the Baptist Church moved from its property at Newtown Settlement just north of Terry to the present site. It was replaced in 1855 by a brick building, having material taken from the old Friendship Church of that community. The Methodist Church formerly stood where the Burnett home now stands near the Railroad Avenue, and later became the Terry United Methodist Church, which is now closed. The area is called the Church Square now. The Terry Grove Church, and on the right-hand side is the Spring Ridge United Methodist Church. The Terry Grove MB Church was founded, is the oldest African-American church in the Terry area. Court records, land tracts, and certain historical events indicate the first church was built there in 1865, just right after the American Civil War. As I told you, the original Methodist church closed. The Spring Ridge United Methodist Church has taken its place for the Methodist in the Terry area. We have the Little Bethel CME Church, was built in 1891. Little Bethel Church has been viewed as having a progressive leadership and has been the local focal point for grassroots efforts during the Civil Rights Movement. In December 1900, under the leadership of Bishop C.P. Jones, the founder of the Holiness Movement, the Collis Hill Church of Christ Holiness USA was established. This is what you see on the right. That's the old, whoops, go back. Thank you. That's the old church itself. I try to get some of the pictures of the older churches there for you that no longer are there. Now, the other thing that stands out in a town is its school, for its young people. Towns cannot survive without their young growing up and hopefully staying in that town, and there are things to do to stay there. The school square was behind the present Methodist church site. The school was called the Terry Academy. The Terry Academy School closed and sold their property. The Terry Graded School was built on Utica Street in 1896. In 1915, and this is the 1915 Terry Graded School, consolidated with several other schools in the area to become the Terry Consolidated School, and this is the one you see here. The African American Public School was built, and this is one you see on the right-hand side here, in 1920 during the segregation period of Mississippi's separate but not equal period of time. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Mississippi was forced to integrate their schools, districts, and their schools. The Terry African American Public School now is a private home. There's quite a few beautiful homes there in Terry, and one of those, one of the older ones in 1830, built around 1830, is the Fortner home. It's the one here, Fortner home. The Fortner family lived between Terry and Dry Grove in southeast Hinds County. They operated the ferry across the Pearl River. The Fortner family moved into the present-day area of Terry in the southeastern Hinds County in purchasing around 1,500 acres in the early 1830s. The other home is the Dudley Jones, the one you see on the right-hand side here. The Dudley Jones house was built in 1907. It's located on the Railroad Avenue in the heart of the downtown area. It's been on the historic registry since 1984 and has been featured in several national publications. Each year they have a event where you can go into the homes, and if you keep your eye on the Terry events on their Terry City website, you'll find that when that occurs. Then we have on the right the Underwood House here is located in the heart of Terry near the intersection of Cunningham Avenue and Utica Streets. The house was built in the late 1800s, and it was originally owned by the Underwood family, who were one of the original settlers of Terry. The Wolf House, as you see here, was built around 1852. It is located on Claiborne Street across from the town's water tower It's been on the National Registry of Historical Places since 1989. Then we have the old Terry Jail. This is what it looked like back then, and this is what it looks like. Y'all don't have inmates in that one anymore. Okay, just checking. Okay, there's some great stories about the jail. They're in the book, and I'll tell you a couple of them real quick that are kind of funny. There are stories about people walking past the jail and hearing really beautiful singing going on inside the jail. So it's somebody that's been arrested has got a great voice that they hear when they go by there. But the fun one is when the kids, the teenagers big tough, they start walking by the jail house, and all of a sudden they hear wolves howling inside the jail. Some inmate is, boo or something like that. It scatters the teenagers real quick away from it. But the jail was, I guess, it was not actually the center of the town, I would say. Too much of that. Then we looked at our citizens. I told you earlier that about small towns, it's not the buildings, and it's not the railroad, and it's not all that. It's actually the people. The people make the town. You would not have, Terry, you wouldn't have any small town unless you had those people, hard-working people, to keep the town going. I want to tell you, Terry is growing. The 2000 census, it was around 660 people. It's over 1,000 people now, and there's a new subdivision ready to be built in the Terry city limits. Terry is growing, obviously with the help of their leadership and the folks there in Terry. But here's some of the great folks citizens. I want to show you a couple of pictures of it. I love the Avenue kids here, 1969. And there's a young lady here. Does anybody know who this young lady happens to be? She's sitting on the front row, Ms. Lawrence. Miss Combs at the time, that's her, sitting up against her father's store there. Check it out. And I won't tell the story about you love to go to Mr. Head's because of the ice cream. Is that it? Is that the one you know? I won't tell them about that then, is it? Okay. And one of the famous school teachers there in Terry. This is the one. This right here is George Terry. It's one of the last real Terrys that lived in Terry. He lives in Florida now. George helped us out with a lot of good stories and information. This is George's mother here, and their house is in Terry. And of course, I love this one here. It's always the young people that we need to make sure we take care of, raise them up, and keep them there in the town. I'm not a citizen of Terry, but I fell in love with Terry. It is a great place. Now, you all remember that famous band, Rick and the Rockets of the 1950s. Does anybody remember Rick and the Rockets? I don't remember. This was a high school band out of Terry in the 1950s. The leader of it was Rick Richardson. And if you don't know that, Rick still plays music. And I can't tell you where it's at right now. I haven't been able to find that out, but he's still there. Unfortunately, we sold out of books. And if you would like to have a book, we have two ways you can sign up for them. So more books we have, the cheaper the price is going to be. We have Carolyn Clements was nice enough to give her phone number. Also, there is several sheets with pens over by the sign up in the coffee area to my left, your right, where you can sign up, just print your name, a phone number or email, along with the number of books, 20, 30, 40 books, how many books you want to buy. More the merrier. And I do appreciate being invited, and thank you for the Mississippi Department of Archives and History allow me to give this presentation. Thank you very much. I'm sorry there's no time for questions. Oh,
There's not much, but we do have time for
we
a
have
few
time for a
questions.
couple of
Anybody
questions.
has-
Yes, ma'am.
Hold on.
Still a peach orchard in the Terry area?
There's no peach orchard. If you remember going down Highway 51 and stopping, my father was from Georgetown, and we had relatives in Hazelhurst and Crystal Springs. We stopped going and coming every time we went down there when the peaches were ripe, when they're in season, and stopping it. And there was that white kind of frame building with, do you remember that? And I also remember off to the other side was the horse ranch, the Arabian horses. Do y'all remember that? Absolutely gorgeous Arabian horses. This is off of Highway 51. It's 55 now. I'm talking about 51 in 1950s, a long time ago. Yeah, before 55. It's 55 now, yeah, right. But I don't know of any peaches at all unless and I wish they'd bring them back again. My connection is, my father drove a truck of vegetables and fruit from Crystal Springs, Hazelhurst, and Terry, picking them up, taking them up to Tennessee to be sold up there. So my dad would take me by there to say, hey, there's a packing place where I pick up the peaches. So that's how I knew about Terry. Yes, sir.
I forget what year it was when they used to have they would light the fires of smoke at the peach orchard.
Because of the cold weather.
And it drifted over the interstate and caused a big wreck.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the exact reason, but that's about the time that peach orchard went out of business.
Probably went out of
The
business.
lawsuit, I believe.
Yeah. What year was that, Terry? Do you,
I remember.
you remember the year that took place?
No, I don't.
But
It's in the, probably the 90s.
90s, early 90s, yeah. Yes, sir.
I think you did say that agriculture was one of the main economic activities in Terry,
Yes, sir.
and I guess cotton production was important in the area. I'm wondering, did sharecropping impact the area?
Oh, yes, sir. There was, in fact, we have stories in the book about individuals who were sharecroppers, individuals who in the 30s, 40s, and 50s talk about working out with the cotton in the cotton fields. One of the pictures I have, several pictures in the book of what was called the cotton press, where the cotton was pressed and loaded up onto the train that was near the railroad track. Yes, sir. That was, when I was talking about cotton being king, that was part of it, the economy there. Yes, sir. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, the buildings, the mansions are so beautiful.
Yes, ma'am.
Who were the architects? Who designed them? And who built them?
Carolyn lives in one of them, so do you know who designed those? Yeah, they built the house, Dudley Jones' house. I do not know the exact architects of those, no. What we did, we showed kind of pictures of the inside as well as the outside and kind of told a little history of it, but not who the designers were or the builders. Any other questions?
Do we know what the price of the books is?
Oh, well, the original price of the book was $40. Now, that depends on how many we can publish. The more we can get printed, the less the price is going to be.
My wife says that is the more you spend, the more you save.
More you spend, the more you save. That's exactly.
Well, y'all
I've
come
heard that
over here
one.
and save some money. Help me thank Tom Watts for this, and I hope that we see
Thank
you
you
all
very
back
much.
here next week.